the summer of 2025, I traveled to Nepal with my wife and my sister. It had been a dream of ours for many years to attempt the trek up to the Everest Base Camp. One of those things that you keep in your drawer marked someday. That drawer stayed shut for almost 5 years. That was until my sister gave me a call one day and asked me if I was ready to finally make it happen. So, 5 years later, the trip to Everest Base Camp was finally back on. As we got into Kathmandu, I found that the city was submerged in such a nasty smog. The densest smog I had ever experienced in my life. I soon learned that Kathmandu had one of the highest levels of air pollution in the world. Construction, burning waste and fumes from thousands of vehicles condensed into a valley with nowhere for any of it to go. But none of that mattered. Somewhere beyond all that haze, there was an adventure waiting for me. That evening, I met up with my wife and my sister, both of whom would join me on this adventure. We explored the vibrant nightlife of Kathmandu's Tamil district for a few hours and then called it a day to get some rest before the next morning. The next morning, we started our preparations to begin our journey towards Everest Base Camp. We rapidly packed our day packs and our duffel bags, struggling to limit our needs for the next 12 days to a maximum of 10 kilos. We then met the rest of the trekkers in our group, a total of 16 enthusiastic individuals, along with our local guide, Lakshman. Today, we were taking a bus from Kathmandu to Ramachep, a small village 6 hours away, where we would catch our flight into the mountains from the town of Lukla. After what seemed like an endless journey through the most bumpy and dusty makeshift roads in my life, we finally made it to Ramachep, where we stopped for some tea before heading to the campsites. As I got to know the various individuals in our group, I found myself quite fascinated by the broad variety of people and personalities that were in our group. Yes, there were a few well-traveled and well-trained adventurers, as I had imagined during the months preparing myself for this journey. But there were many individuals just like myself who you would imagine had no business trekking to the Everest Base Camp. There were people recovering from illnesses, senior citizens in their 70s, parents with young children, energetic Instagrammers, and even totally unprepared individuals who packed just their sneakers, motivated simply by the thrill of spontaneity. The next morning, we woke up early to catch our flight to Lukla, which is commonly dubbed one of the most dangerous airports in the world. As exciting and reassuring as that sounded, I had heard rumblings among the comrades that all flights were being cancelled due to the high smog and poor visibility conditions. There was a very small window to get on that plane, and if it did not work out today, there was a high chance that we would not finish the trek in time to catch our flights back home. As we waited for the rest of the comrades to eventually wake up from their slumber and finish up their mandatory TikTok reels, I started to think about some of the conversations we had had on the bus here yesterday. "Why are you doing this trek?" somebody had asked the group. This, you could imagine, would be a common question that people would ask during this trip. And funny enough, this was the same question that I got asked by my family and my friends, albeit with a more puzzled look when I told them that I was planning this adventure. Those conversations yesterday had made me question my own motive. Why was I here, starting this uncomfortable journey? What motive was I seeking, if not the simple thrill of an adventure? As we made our way towards the airport, my mind started to race with all these philosophical and, in a way, existential questions. When we got to the airport, we quickly came to the realization that, just like us, there were several groups of trekkers waiting to catch the flight out of here, except they had arrived here much earlier than us, and boarding was on a first-come, first-served basis. All we could do now was sit around and hope that we could board before the afternoon smog started to get thicker. So, to kill time, we decided to walk around and scope out the surroundings a little. To answer this question of why, first we need to think about what it is that we mean when we ask the question, "Why am I here?" I don't mean to look at this question from a scientific lens, one of cause and effect created by sequential events. That answer is clear. I'm here because I read a book once about the Everest region and the beauty of its mountains, and that book inspired a fantasy within me to explore this place myself. Cause and effect. No, that is not what I'm after. Rather, I want to try and answer this question of why in relation to purpose. Where do I intend to go from here, and why do I want to go there? What is the purpose of my existence here and now? And what is it that I'm trying to achieve through this existence? These are the questions that I hope to explore. When we got back from our stroll a few hours later, we received news that all remaining flights had been cancelled for the day. So, we began executing on Plan B, which was to take a bus to a remote village called Phaplu, 6 hours away, closer to the mountains, to hopefully catch a flight out of there the next morning. As I tried to soothe my tinnitus from all that chaos in the bus, my thoughts drifted through the few instances in my own life that gave me a sense of purpose. Back during my childhood, it was much easier to find purpose in the things that I did without even trying. It wasn't even something that I had to think about. But as an adult, it's a totally different ballgame. Now, I find that purpose has to be constantly sought, but it is rarely found. As an adult, I find that purpose is most often just imposed on me, and not really created by me. It is imposed by the anxieties, the responsibilities, and the expectations of what it means to be an adult. So, the few rare instances that I do find some sort of spark or an outlet that could possibly ignite purpose in my adult life, I try hard and protect it. Most recently, I have found purpose in this, in keeping my thoughts and explorations recorded through these journals that I share with you. That purpose is motivated by a belief I have created over the last decade that the thoughts, the experiences, and the stories that I create in my life are the only footprint that I can ultimately leave on this world. One day I will pass on, and I think it would be such a waste if the stories that make me who I am and the lessons that I learn from life just kind of end with me. Lessons that in some form or the other could guide somebody else, somebody who is navigating life, just as they have guided me. Perhaps these lessons will be meaningless, but if any of my stories of sorrows or joy can give someone out there any new perspectives in their life, then I think that in itself is more purpose than I could ever ask for. We kept driving through the night on this dilapidated bus which had neither any sufficient legroom nor any discernible suspension. Frustration had started to set in. We were supposed to be in Lukla by now, but here we were, almost a day behind schedule, driving towards some obscure place in the mountains with ever-increasing uncertainty as to whether we would be able to catch a flight tomorrow as well.
Yes, Phaplu. Phaplu.
We finally arrived in the village of Phaplu around midnight, tired, cold, and low in spirit. But we were welcomed with some warm dal bhat and tea, which is exactly what we needed to get cozy for the night and get some much-needed sleep. Only time would tell what adventures tomorrow would bring.
Si Shep. Kone? Kone?
The next morning, I came downstairs to find the rest of the group looking worried and engaged in heated discussions. It quickly became apparent that there were no flights leaving from Phaplu as well, and it seemed as though we had come here for nothing. More importantly, I was starting to feel that what had started on a positive, exciting note was quickly going downhill. After some fervent back and forth, the next course of action was decided. Most of the group chose to take another 10-hour journey by jeep to a place called Surke, through rough and dangerous off-road tracks, and then hike another few hours to get to Lukla. My wife, my sister, and I had no energy nor patience for this plan, so we decided to amicably split from the group and catch a helicopter directly to Lukla to avoid losing another day on this trip. We still hadn't fully recovered from the last 6-hour bus journey, and we did not want to be completely exhausted before we had even officially started the trek. Hey, at least this experience would lighten up our moods. We landed in Lukla around 1 p.m., exhilarated from the helicopter ride that got us here. After having some lunch from town, we started making our way on the 8-kilometer walk towards our next destination, Phakding, a small village north of Lukla in the Khumbu region and the Dinboche river valley. The air up here was still dusty and filled with smog, but it was a bit cleaner than down in the city. It had started to rain and the temperature had also dropped quite significantly, so we put on our jackets and made our way through the cobbled streets of the town, crossing lines of donkeys making their way down from the mountains. I quickly learned that this was the main mode of logistics to take all sorts of goods up to the Everest Base Camp. There were no trains or buses or trucks, just donkeys, horses, yaks, and, well, people carrying everything from dry food and raw meat to construction materials to those who were up in the mountains. This was the lifeline of the mountain economy. It felt good to be here right now with my family, making a long-held dream of ours come true. As I started to catch my stride and settle into the hike, my mind started to drift back to the thoughts about purpose. What is purpose? And what is the purpose of my existing here and now? As with any metaphysical dissection, I first need to make sure that I understand the question. Before I can logically think about the purpose of existence, I'll need to first understand what existence even means as a subjective experience. Firstly, I'll make the argument that everything that I can claim to exist exists only through my own subjective awareness. I cannot claim with any certainty that anything outside of my awareness of it exists. When I say that these mountains exist, what I'm really saying is that my awareness of it exists. Anything more than that is simply impossible. Now, I'm not saying that something that you have not experienced does not exist. No. There are certainly instances when I believe things to exist, even when I have not experienced them myself. For example, I believed Mount Everest existed even before I ever saw it myself. I read about it, I watched videos about it, I heard people talk about it. I believed it because many others have proven its existence and documented that proof. However, my belief of the existence of Mount Everest comes solely from my awareness of the existence of those proofs and the sources from which those proofs came. So, I think it is fair to claim that the perceived existence of Mount Everest or this stupa or anything for that matter, at least in my subjective experience, arises only from my conscious awareness of it.
Alright, see you in the EPC.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. I'm going. Tata.
Now, within the boundaries of my awareness, everything I can claim to exist arises only through my conceptualization of its existence. Conceptualization is the process of assigning certain qualities to the subjective or objective experience in order to define it relative to and distinct to our own self-concept. This set of qualities is what becomes the essence of the subjective or objective experience. What I mean is that the very concept of the I or the self is required to first be defined by a set of qualities before anything external to it can be said to exist outside of it. I, for example, am an entity bounded physically by the skin and the organs within it, by the facial features that it exhibits, bounded consciously by the awareness that it projects and the beliefs that it encompasses. These mountains around me are defined by qualities such as their physical characteristics, their height, their geography, their stories. In a general sense, I can claim without much controversy, I hope, that a simple chair that I sit on is an object that exists separate to me as an entity. This separation of a chair or these mountains or anything from myself is based on these qualities that define its existence. My awareness of the fact that a chair exists is dependent on my awareness of myself existing and on the fact that I have defined a concept of a chair through the qualities that create the essence of what it means to be a chair. Something that I can sit on, is stable, has legs to elevate me to a certain height, and so on. Without this conceptualization of what I am and what a chair is relative to me, there is no awareness to say that either of these things exist. As the sun started to set, we finally reached our destination for the night. I was hungry and cold as hell, and I couldn't wait to eat some warm food and get into bed. But overall, the day was a lot of fun and the hike wasn't too bad. I naively hoped that tomorrow would be the same. We woke up early the next morning and mentally prepared ourselves for the long and arduous day ahead. I had read extensively that the journey to our next stop, Naamche Bazaar, would be one of the most difficult on this trip. 11 kilometers of steep ascent, gaining 830 meters in elevation. It would take us 8 hours in total to complete the day, if everything went well. Naamche is the starting point for most expeditions to Everest and other Himalayan peaks, and a place where most trekkers spend a day to get acclimatized to the altitude. Hopefully, if the weather was clear, we would also be able to get our first views of the highest Himalayan peaks like Lhotse, Nuptse, and maybe even Mount Everest. The day started slow and steady, with lots of breaks in between. My legs were feeling the soreness from the previous day's hike, but I knew it was only going to get worse from here. Last night, I had discussed that we perceive existence through the conscious awareness of the world around us and through the act of conceptualizing the essence of this world. Expanding on this idea, we can deduce that everything that exists in the universe requires self-conceptualization. Animals conceptualize. For example, they need to be aware of and define what food is and what is safe to eat versus what is not. Plants conceptualize. They need to be aware of water and nutrients external to themselves to be able to pull those elements up from the soil through the osmotic process. To do so, they need to distinguish between the soil and various elements that nourish them. Plants need to conceptualize to be aware of the photons from the sun in order to face that sunlight every morning. Our emotions like happiness or anger exist only through the conceptualization of the subjective experience and the physiological and psychological changes that give rise or arise from it. The state of human suffering, on the other hand, exists only through conceptualization of what is good and bad. Even so-called inanimate objects, like the limestone on the surface of the mountains behind me, seem to conceptualize the essence of what it means to be limestone rock. The crystalline structure of the rock, its hardness, its color, its reflectivity compared to, say, sandstone or any other type of rock. All these measurable qualities or pieces of information are somehow encoded into the essence of this rock, made up by the subatomic particles that create it and the way those particles have organized themselves. This inherent record of these qualities that define limestone, plants, animals, humans, or anything in the world for that matter, are forms of self-conceptualization by the subcomponents that created these things, as these qualities are not random with respect to what defines these things. Yes, all these things come into existence through physical processes and can be explained through scientific cause and effect. But the conceptualization and the distinction of the qualities of these things precede the processes that create them. Because without that distinction of such qualities, there would be nothing specific and distinct for these processes to act on. So, all this to say, it is the conceptualization of distinct qualities around us that gives rise to our awareness of the existence of distinct elements of this universe. By late afternoon, the weather had turned cold and rainy, and we were running way behind schedule. We had about 3 hours before the sun would start to set, and we still had a long uphill battle ahead of us. Step by step, we made our way through the cold rain along the Dingboche River and started ascending a staircase cut right into the mountain towards the iconic Heli suspension bridge, one of the highest suspension bridges in Nepal.
This time.
The view from the top of the bridge was absolutely spectacular. The sight of the fog blanketing the mountains and the sound of the river gushing 200 feet beneath us, it gave us just the boost of energy we needed to keep pushing through and upwards. The climb seemed to be never ending. The sun had started to set, and the temperature was quickly plummeting with each step that we took. But the tree cover gradually started to open up, and through it we got a glimpse of the magnificent peaks standing tall through the cloud cover. We were finally in the mountains.
Good job.
I haven't reached yet.
We reached Naamche that evening, just as the sun set. I was quite delirious from exhaustion by then, and all I could think to myself was, what on earth have I gotten myself into? I was comforted only by the thought that we would be spending the next day resting and acclimatizing in Naamche Bazaar. After spending a day in Naamche resting, on day 6, we began our journey towards the next stop, the village of Tingboche. It would take us 6 to 8 hours to make the steep descent towards the Dingboche River, followed by a long, steady climb to Tingboche. Our guide had promised us that we would be rewarded by the majestic views of mountains like Ama Dablam and Nupse on the way. So, despite the fact that my legs had had enough, I was actually looking forward to it. Now that we have a framework from which to understand where existence arises from, we can return to our primary question. What is the purpose of existence? We can start to explore the relationship between purpose and existence. Let's think through the example of a humble chair that is made of cedar wood. As we have discussed, this chair is simply an idea that is conceived. It is not something that can exist without the qualities that make it a chair. That is, its sturdiness, its ability to support and elevate us, its comfort, its constructability. The purpose of the chair, as far as I, the subject conceiving the chair, is concerned, is to exhibit these specific qualities that define its existence. Now, if I were to disassemble this very chair by removing its screws and dowels and its upholstery, and lay the wooden planks of cedar wood and all the components out in front of you, it would no longer exist as a chair. And therefore, its purpose as a chair no longer exists as well, but its potential for purpose does. All it takes for that purpose of the chair to return is for me or the universe to organize the individual components back into a system of qualities that can once again be conceptualized as a chair. So, it is this very act of organizing qualities of the preceding subcomponents into a new system with specialized, specific qualities that I, the conceiver, can value, that brings the chair into existence and gives it purpose. This train of thought leads us to a deduction about the first two principles about purpose. That the purpose of something is to exhibit the qualities upon which its existence is conceptualized and can be valued, and that the purpose of a concept is realized from its potential through the act of conceptualization by the subject that conceives it. As we entered Tingboche, we found ourselves immersed in a thick fog with very poor visibility. Tingboche is home to the largest Buddhist monastery in the Khumbu region. Unfortunately, given how tired we were, visiting the monastery was the last thing on our minds. All I wanted to do was to get to our uninsulated tea house and get a few hours of rest before doing this again the next day. This trek was constantly reminding me that the things that we cherish the most in times like this really are the simplest ones, those that we take for granted.
We did it! High five!
Okay, let's go back to our thought experiment about the disassembled chair made of cedar wood, the one that has all the separate components laid out in front of us. This idea of a chair, of the essence of a chair, it was not formed in isolation independently from concepts that existed before it. Rather, the essence of this chair is a function of the essence of the subcomponents that precede it. The concept of this chair cannot exist without the qualities of the planks of cedar wood, the screws, the upholstery from which it was organized. The sturdiness of this chair, the constructability, its aesthetics, these are all qualities already encompassed within the planks of cedar wood from which this chair was conceived. But these planks of wood, the subcomponents of the chair, have qualities far wider than those required to define the concept of a chair. These planks of cedar wood can also be organized to conceive things other than a chair, like a table or a guitar or a boat, because of other qualities like its resonance and its buoyancy, qualities that are not required for the specific conception of a chair. Hence, the purpose of these planks of cedar wood that precede the chair have the potential to become a chair, but its full potential for purpose is so much more than that. Let's go even further down this train of thought. The tree from which the planks of cedar wood are cut are conceptualized by an even wider range of qualities from which its essence arises. A cedar tree's existence is also conceptualized by its qualities as a tree. A living organism that grows, provides shade, recycles oxygen, provides shelter and nutrition to other organisms, and gives life to an entire ecosystem that thrives on it. It becomes clear that the cedar tree still has the potential to fulfill its purpose as a chair or a house or a boat or a guitar made from planks of cedar wood, but its potential for purpose is far, far greater. So, this implies that the very qualities that give rise to the purpose of a chair and that of a plank of cedar wood must exist somewhere within the range of qualities that define the cedar tree itself. These qualities would have existed even before the first chair was ever conceived or invented thousands of years ago. The qualities of the chair and the planks of cedar wood, and thereby the purpose of these things, are simply a subset of the potential for purpose of the cedar tree from which they are conceived. So here, we're at a point where we can establish a few more principles about purpose.
You ready?
That the purpose of a concept is a subset of the potential purpose of the subcomponents from which its concept is organized. And as a result, potential for purpose exists within the subcomponents from which a concept is organized, even before the concept itself is conceptualized. Finally, the act of conceptualization filters down and reduces the potential for purpose that would have existed in the preceding subcomponents from which the concept was organized. We can continue to go down this hierarchy of subcomponents from which the cedar tree is conceived. The organic molecules that arrange themselves into cellulose and lignin, the atomic particles of carbon and hydrogen from which these organic molecules arise, the protons and neutrons that give rise to those carbon atoms, the quarks whose qualities give rise to protons and neutrons, and so on and so forth, until we hit the limits of our current scientific understanding of the building blocks of matter. Nevertheless, we can imagine that we would ultimately get to the fundamental system that conceived these building blocks of matter, that is, the universe itself. Applying the principles that we deduced earlier on, we can then reason that the potential for purpose of every single thing that exists in this universe, including ourselves, exists in those carbon atoms. It exists in those protons and neutrons. It exists in those quarks, and it existed in whatever fundamental system, let's call it the universal singularity, from which all these subatomic particles were once conceived. So, the essence of everything, the quality of everything, and the potential purpose of everything is contained in the very fabric of the universe itself. That evening, we got to Dingboche late in the afternoon. We were definitely starting to feel the effects of the altitude on our bodies. But we tried not to focus on the effects too much as we re-energized with some much-needed warm food and tea. We then headed out to explore town and experience the life of the village. We played a game of pool with the locals and then headed over to a local cafe where we learned a bit about the history of the famous mountaineers who conquered these peaks around us. These photos tell a story of men and women who made it their life's sole purpose to conquer the top of the world, and consequently helped the people of the Khumbu region make a living through the mountaineering economy. I wonder if they had the same level of clarity that we think they had, looking back at their past. After spending a day in Dingboche to acclimatize and recover our energy, the next morning we started the grueling journey towards Lobuche, the next village en route to base camp. It had snowed the previous night, and the ground was covered with a fresh sprinkling of snow that reminded me of icing sugar on a bundt cake. Clearly, days of eating dal bhat and dry food were making me crave the more privileged things in life. Despite these longings that I would be unable to resolve for at least another week, I found myself in awe of the majestic panorama around me. The mountains really reveal themselves on sunny days like this and remind me why I chose to do this in the first place. So, we had previously concluded that the essence of everything, the quality of everything, and the potential purpose of everything is contained in the very fabric of the universe itself. I found the need to go through this metaphysical analysis of purpose to identify a few key principles and characteristics of this concept that we call purpose. But I want to try and ground this exploration back in practicality and discuss how this idea can apply to understanding purpose in our own human existence. What we have uncovered is that the purpose of our own existence and the purpose of everything that exists is simply a tiny subset of the potential for purpose of the universe. The seeds of purpose were first sown when the universe began, and when it conceptualized the first building blocks of matter. And ever since then, it has been on a vast journey of conceptualizing new elements of existence into being, to fulfill its own potential through the qualities that define it. We are simply one avenue through which the universe seeks to fulfill its own purpose.
Okay.
By midday, our pace had once again slowed considerably as the air thinned out. As we got to Lukla, the landscape had also transitioned to a glacial, rocky, and rugged moraine.
Everything here.
Everything.
Mr. DJ Milan.
DJ Milan.
DJ.
Woo! Chicka-pwa!
After having lunch at Lukla, we started making our way through the famous Lukla Pass. We had been warned by many guides about the unpredictable weather of the pass, and we soon found that warning to be grounded in truth, as we were surrounded by a thick blanket of fog and strong winds.
It's super cold. Why are you loving it?
The skies, the mountains, maybe there's a sunshine.
There is no sunshine. Ain't no sunshine. Oh, no.
As humans, as beings of denser fields of consciousness compared to the rest of matter, we have the power to will our purpose. We have the power to define our purpose based on our own individuality, our own identity. We can conceptualize ideas of who we are. And so, within these conceptualized boundaries that we ourselves create, the purpose of our existence is to exhibit the very qualities that define who we are, to realize value in our own existence. What this means is that purpose is not some absolute mystical destiny that we need to spend a lifetime searching for. No, rather, it is something that is right in front of us, defined only by us, and that can evolve as the idea of who we are evolves. If we value love, then it is our purpose to find and give love. If we value family, then it is our purpose to build a family and a community that we can love. If we value strength and confidence as part of what defines our existence, then it is our purpose to open ourselves up with the confidence that everything will be all right. If we value curiosity and exploration, then it is our purpose to become curious and explore the world and the nature of it. The outcomes, the results of seeking these qualities that we value, what we often refer to as success, is simply a byproduct of our journey towards turning potential into purpose. As we made our way through the pass, we stumbled across a humbling memorial made in dedication to all the mountaineers who had sacrificed their lives to achieve their life's purpose of reaching the top of Everest. Call it courage, call it recklessness, or whatever you will. To me, one thing is certain. Those who lie here had such clarity about what they wanted to do in life and the courage to go after it. Their purpose was not destiny, it was their choice. A choice that they valued so highly that they paid with their lives. It was now so cold and windy, and the entire group was running on fumes. My fingers and my face had started to get numb, so I retreated into a mindless meditative state, focusing simply on putting one foot in front of the other. The stop at the memorial had been a sobering experience for me. Purpose comes with risks. Purpose requires courage. Most of us, we stumble through life not knowing what our purpose should be. But for others, their purpose is so clear that they are willing to pay the highest value to achieve it, their lives. If purpose truly is an inherent characteristic of life, then why are so many of us confused about what we value and how we should spend this limited time that we have on Earth?
Remember, let's feel.
Okay. How are you feeling?
Bye-bye.
The next morning, we set out for Gorak Shep, the last village before the world as most people know it ends. The landscape around us had turned into something otherworldly. I had never experienced anything like it before. The air up here was razor sharp, slicing through my nostrils with each breath, reminding me that it was doing me a favor by just being there at all. Somewhere along the last few days, I had picked up what the locals refer to as the Kumbu cough, a rough, persistent bubbling in my chest that made my life miserable as I stopped to wipe a runny snot off my nose every few minutes. The mountains, of course, did not seem to care much. And yet, we had come this far. Every so often, a fellow trucker would cross paths with me and extend a fist which I would meet with mine. It became a small ritual of ours, an unspoken acknowledgement that we were all, each of us, slightly mad to be here and completely glad about it. We moved slowly through the jagged, icy terrain along the Khumbu Glacier, surrounded on all sides by the giants of the Himalayas. Nuptse, Changse, Lhotse, and beyond them, half-hidden yet exuding confidence, Everest. Witnesses that have stayed constant through Earth's epochs, looking down, instilling in us a humility we hadn't known we needed as we walked among their feet. Much of the time, who we are and what qualities we wish to shine out into the world through our existence becomes obscured. Not suddenly, but gradually, borne away by shifting circumstances, by the noise of other people's expectations, by the slow accumulation of our anxieties and our fears. Our values become useful here, as a compass pointing towards purpose. For what we value is a true reflection of the qualities that we have conceived our existence upon. It becomes a compass that points towards who we need to become. How we define ourselves or how society defines us is simply an idea, a conceptualization of the self. I am this or I am that, and therefore I am willing to do this or I am only capable of doing that. We ourselves have constructed these ideas of who we are and what our boundaries are purely through our own imagination. None of these ideas, none of these boundaries really exist outside of it. But by conceptualizing these boundaries, what we have unconsciously done is filter down the potential for purpose in our lives. So, when we feel like we are lost in life and that we have strayed far away from what our true selves should be, we should take a step back. If we dissolve away these boundaries through which these ideas of ourselves are conceived, what remains? The same thing that was always there. The same organizing impulse that arranged carbon atoms into living cells, that assembled protons and neutrons into the matter from which all of this, the glacier, the peaks, the cold thin air, and human life was eventually made. Purpose at that level is not something to be found or constructed. It was already there. It has always been there. We are simply an instrument through which the conscious universe fulfills its own purpose. And if we have faith in that universe from which all things arose, then finding purpose may simply be the long, slow process of learning to let the universe flow through us and getting out of its way. We reached Gorak Shep that afternoon just as the weather started to turn. Base camp was a mere 5 kilometers away, but our bodies were now running on reserves and we had to rest for the night. Base camp would still be there tomorrow. It had waited this long, after all. We were up before the cold had fully decided what it wanted to do with the day. The sun was just beginning to find its way over the ridgeline. The first thing worth illuminating, it seemed, was Mount Pumori. The light caught the snow being lifted from its summit, like smoke rising from a chimney. I stood and watched it longer than I probably should have. Some things earn that respect. This was it, the last leg. Base camp lay 5 kilometers ahead and 200 meters above us. 3 to 4 hours, they said. We would see. The mountain, as always, would have its own opinion on the matter. Somewhere along the way, I had carried with me an image, the one that you find on websites and screensavers of Everest in its magnificence rising above everything else. This was, I would discover today, a view that this trail does not offer. The peak hides itself behind its neighbors, its summit only barely visible on a clear day. We heard from the chatter last night that the best view of Everest is from Kala Pathar, another peak near Gorak Shep. However, we had decided to skip it as we were in no condition to negotiate with the altitude today. But standing here, it occurred to me that none of that really mattered, because just being here to take this tremendous experience in was really the biggest blessing of all. And before we knew it, we were there, or nearly there, just a few hundred meters. This was the end of the journey for some of us, and for others, the very beginning of a journey to the top of the world.
How do you feel?
Dead.
In a previous episode of Explorations, I had concluded that we find beauty in life when we become aware of our values and let it align with the qualities of the world that we perceive. So then, as it relates to purpose, beauty itself becomes our North Star. Beauty shines a light on where we need to go and who we need to become. To seek beauty in our lives is to seek purpose in our lives. And this brings me back to the original question that led me down this entire exploration in the first place. Why? Why do people challenge themselves through demanding experiences such as this trek? Why does anyone go out of their way to seek discomfort, deliberately, willfully? I think they do it because they are responding to a call, a subtle but persistent call to go find beauty in their lives. I think they do it because it is their way of realizing their own purpose through what they know is in their potential. They do it because it aligns their values to how they define their own existence and to their beliefs of who they are or who they need to become. They do it to explore what the world has to offer, to learn what they are capable of, to build confidence, not just for themselves, but for those who will learn confidence from them one day. They do it to break the chains that define them, as parents, as housewives, as senior citizens, as people who are too sick, too lost, too scared, and too incapable of taking on such challenges. They do it to be able to believe in themselves once again, that they can take the steps towards becoming who they need to be. They do it to love themselves. In the end, this journey, it's not really about a mountain. It never was. This journey, and maybe all journeys in life, are simply a path towards turning our potential into purpose.
ladies and gentlemen, the Lukla Pass.
She's like going to water bottle.